Somewhere right now, a locomotive engineered to run for 50 years stands motionless, swallowed by rust and silence. Not scrapped, not preserved, just abandoned. Around the world, we have identified 10 forgotten trains, each stranded by a different force. Economic collapse, political retreat, impossible removal costs, regulatory gaps, even nuclear disaster. We are counting them down from haunting to hopeful. Number 10 waits on a Bolivian salt flat. In 10th place, the Uyuni Train Cemetery sprawls across Bolivia's salt flats, a graveyard where late 19th and early 20th century steam and diesel locomotives stand exposed to the relentless winds of the Altiplano. These engines, once the backbone of mining routes, were abandoned after the collapse of tin and silver exports in the 1940s. With the mines shuttered, the cost of removing these massive machines far exceeded their scrap value, especially in such a remote and saline environment. Salt-laden air accelerates corrosion, turning steel to powder at a pace rarely seen elsewhere. Here, industrial ambition and economic optimism gave way to neglect, leaving a rusting fleet that now draws tourists and photographers, but receives no formal preservation. The Uyuni Cemetery embodies the uneasy silence that follows a boom, where the machinery of progress is left to decay, unclaimed by either history or industry. Number 9. The Newfoundland Railway's leftover rolling stock stands as a stark reminder of how policy decisions can erase an entire transport system overnight. In 1988, the Canadian government withdrew federal subsidies, forcing the abrupt closure of the island's historic railway. Dozens of diesel locomotives and mixed freight cars were left stranded along the line. Some cannibalized for parts, many simply left to rust. The shutdown triggered a wave of community job losses as maintenance shops shuttered and local economies unraveled. Unlike sites marooned by geography, these trains were orphaned by legislation, a bureaucratic act that turned vital infrastructure into silent relics, their fate sealed not by terrain, but by the stroke of a pen. 8th place. Rows of withdrawn Kiha series diesel multiple units sit idle in storage yards across Hokkaido, a stark portrait of institutional paralysis within one of the world's most advanced rail networks. Built from the 1970s through the 1990s, these trains were designed for decades of service. But a rapid population decline and plummeting ridership in rural Japan forced mass withdrawals between the early 2000s and the early 2010s. As financial pressures mounted, JR Hokkaido faced a growing backlog of surplus stock and could not afford removal or scrapping. Official filings show maintenance budgets slashed to the bone, with entire fleets parked in the open, exposed to the harsh northern climate. Unlike sites shaped by sudden policy or economic collapse, here abandonment is the result of slow demographic erosion and the absence of clear legislative closure. These modern machines were left to rust in silence, stranded by the very system that once promised perpetual motion. Number 7. The Pyramiden narrow-gauge diesels linger on Svalbard's frozen edge, a silent testament to the abrupt retreat of Soviet ambition in the high Arctic. When the Russian mining company Arktikugol abandoned Pyramiden in 1998, the entire industrial settlement was evacuated almost overnight, leaving behind not only empty buildings but a small fleet of diesel locomotives. These machines, built for the polar coal runs of the 1970s through the 1990s, now sit immobilized in the permafrost, their paint peeling beneath the relentless cycle of freeze and thaw. Attempts to remove them have faltered on the staggering logistics of Arctic extraction. Helicopter and barge quotes routinely outstrip the value of the scrap itself, and every year the winter deepens the damage, fracturing steel and seizing engines. The locomotives endure as relics of a vanished era, caught between the promise of Soviet permanence and the realities of polar abandonment. Number 6. The abandoned rolling stock of Pripyat and Chernobyl sits locked in a perpetual stasis, an industrial tableau sealed by catastrophe. Rows of coaches and diesel locomotives from the 1970s and the 1980s have not moved since April 1986. The evacuation order that emptied Pripyat also froze its rail yards in time. No decommissioning, no salvage, only silence and the slow encroachment of birch and grass. What sets these hulks apart is not just their sudden abandonment, but the invisible barrier of radiation that now defines their fate. Gamma dose rates in these sightings regularly exceed safe occupational limits, rendering even basic removal or scrapping economically and physically prohibitive. Chernobyl Center surveys confirm that localized hotspots can surpass 10 microsieverts per hour, far above what any work crew could safely endure. Here, the cost of extraction is measured not just in money, but in cumulative risk, a calculus that has left these machines to rust where they stand. The result is a rail graveyard uniquely shaped by disaster, where the legacy of progress is shadowed by contamination and the limits of human intervention. Number 5. The Bulawayo Locomotive Graveyard in Zimbabwe stands as a monument to the fallout of economic collapse on a national scale. Here, hundreds of late 20th century diesel locomotives, once the pride of the national railways of Zimbabwe, are left to decay in open-air sidings, their hulking frames frozen by the financial crisis that swept the country through the 1990s and the 2000s. As the economy unraveled, freight volumes plummeted by 70%, stripping the railway of both cargo and cash. Maintenance ceased almost overnight, and with no funds for fuel or repairs, engines were parked and forgotten. Satellite images reveal the yard's relentless expansion as more units joined the ranks of the derelict, while local press reports describe visible pools of leaked oil and diesel seeping into the ground beneath rusting wheels. The graveyard is more than an industrial relic. It is a stark reminder of how macroeconomic failure can turn infrastructure into an environmental hazard and a community's lifeline into a source of silent contamination and lost opportunity. Number 4. The Siberian and Yakutsk sightings present a stark calculation where economics and engineering conspire against removal. Here, dozens of derelict logging and mining locomotives from the 1970s through the 1990s sit frozen in the permafrost, marooned by the sheer logistics of extraction. Salvage contractors quote helicopter lifts at $200 to $500 per ton, while rail-mounted cranes, when they can even reach these isolated tracks, start at $55 per ton, with a 30% surcharge just to mobilize equipment over ice roads or thawing muskeg. The salvage value of steel rarely touches these figures, and the narrow seasonal window for access means each failed attempt drives costs higher. Engineering reports detail how permafrost heave and spring floods destroy temporary roads before the work can begin. In this environment, the fate of these machines is dictated not by indifference, but by a relentless arithmetic. The cost of removal eclipses the value of what can be recovered. The result is a silent fleet, abandoned not by choice, but by the cold logic of numbers, a forensic record of how infrastructure, once vital, becomes too expensive to reclaim. Coming to the top 3, a silent sighting in South Asia stands as a stark illustration of regulatory neglect, where rows of late 20th century coaches were left to rot, not for lack of money or access, but because no one bothered to close the books. Here, the end of service brought no formal decommissioning, no transfer to scrapyards, only a bureaucratic vanishing act. Municipal permits for removal were never filed, and scrapyard ledgers show no record of these vehicles entering the recycling stream. Instead, ownership transfer loopholes and fragmented enforcement allowed rolling stock to be dumped in place, creating informal scrapyards on public land. Diesel and lubricants seep slowly into open drain canals, a pollution risk tracked by local non-governmental organizations but rarely acknowledged in official reports. This abandonment is not a story of remote geography or catastrophic disaster. It is the consequence of policy omission, where the absence of clear stewardship leaves industrial relics to quietly poison their surroundings and erase a chapter of regional rail history. Number 2. Fleets of modern diesel multiple units stand marooned on rural branch lines across Central and Eastern Europe, a silent legacy of privatization's legal oversights. Built from the 1970s through the 1990s, these trains were engineered for efficiency and decades of service, yet found themselves immobilized within weeks of new franchise contracts. The root cause lies buried in the fine print. Concession agreements often omitted explicit disposal clauses, leaving operators and governments locked in disputes over who bears the cost of removal or scrapping. Internal minutes from operator boards reveal how contract language failed to mandate escrow funds for end-of-life decommissioning, turning once valuable assets into stranded liabilities. Heritage groups have lobbied for intervention, but with ownership tangled between defunct state entities and private firms, most units remain where they were withdrawn, exposed to vandalism, theft, and weather. The result is a landscape of rusted potential, where legal ambiguity trumps stewardship and the fate of public investment hinges on overlooked lines in a contract. This unresolved standoff stands as a cautionary tale, urging policymakers to close the gaps before the next generation of infrastructure is left to decay in silence. And finally, in first place, the Tallinn Railway stands as a rare exception to the silence of abandonment, a living testament to what is possible when a community refuses to let its heritage dissolve into rust. In 1951, as Britain's narrow-gauge lines shuttered and their rolling stock faced the torch, a group of volunteers stepped in to rescue the Tallinn's aging locomotives and carriages, some dating back to the 1860s. They formed the world's first volunteer-run railway preservation society, drafting legal charters that protected the line from piecemeal asset stripping and negotiating with local councils for operational rights. Early minutes from the Preservation Society reveal a patchwork of funding, small donations, local business sponsorships, and later tourism revenue that now brings in over £1.5 million a year. Each restoration was a collective effort. Skilled tradespeople, school children, and retirees rebuilt engines in sheds that might otherwise have become mausoleums. Today, the Tallinn not only operates as a working heritage railway, but also serves as a blueprint for community-led stewardship worldwide. Its preserved fleet, including multiple Victorian-era locomotives, turns what could have been a story of decay into one of renewal, demonstrating that abandonment is not inevitable, but a choice shaped by legal protection, volunteer governance, and sustained local investment. The Tallinn's ongoing success reframes the narrative, offering practical hope with clear legal frameworks, diversified funding, and grassroots commitment. Even the most vulnerable relics of industrial progress can be reclaimed, restored, and reimagined as engines of memory and community vitality. Across all 10 silent hulks, one pattern haunts us. Progress discards its own legacy. Machines built for endurance become casualties of short-term thinking and institutional neglect. Their corrosion marks the true cost of abandonment, human, historical, and ecological. Subscribe to join us as we uncover more hidden relics together.